Good afternoon, everyone. I am calling this meeting to order. It was a joint meeting of the Santa Clara City Council and Authorities Concurrent and Santa Clara Stadium Authority meeting, continued from May 12th. So this is a continued session of the meeting from May 12th. We weren't able to finish all the items last Tuesday, so thank you, city councils on the line, for joining us as well as the public. If you're joining us via Zoom meeting, if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, you can press *9, and the assistant city clerks will see that your hand is raised, and they will call on you at the appropriate time. You can also visit us during on the city's website. There's an e-comment section, or send an email to publiccomment@santaclaraca.gov. So that's how you're able to communicate with us. So thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to ask if we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for our statement of values. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we gather, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with restraint, courage, and will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice to all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interest of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so that we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting their needs before all.
Thank you. Please be seated. And just so everyone knows, we are practicing social distancing here in the City Council chambers. Everyone is wearing masks. I have taken mine off to conduct this meeting, but I'm at least 15 to 20 feet away from anyone else. If there is any member of the public that would like to come down to the meeting, we are accepting them in our cafeteria with no more than 10 people, and you would be brought up to the council chambers when your item does come forward. And as always, you can watch us on Santa Clara City Television, Comcast Channel 15, or AT&T Uverse Channel 99, or we are live streaming on the city's YouTube channel or Facebook page. All right, roll call, Assistant City Clerk.
Vice Mayor, Vice Chair Hardy.
Present.
Council Member, Board Member O'Neill.
Present.
Council Member, Board Member Davis.
Here.
Council Member, Board Member Watanabe.
Here.
Council Member, Board Member Shahal.
Present.
Mayor and Chair Gilmore.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our agenda, and the first item we have is the Inside Santa Clara redesign update. City Manager, if you're on the line.
I'm right here, Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We wanted to start with some good news. Staff has been working to receive input on how to revamp the Inside Santa Clara, and Lenka's going to walk us through some of the concepts and some of the new ideas that will reflect as we start publishing in the year 2020. So, Lenka?
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. I'm Lenka Wright, Director of Communications. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, this is an informational report to provide an update on the redesign of Inside Santa Clara. And I would ask for the presentation to be shown on the screen. Thank you so much. Here's some background for you about the city's newsletter. It's a central source of city information for the community to get the latest updates on city initiatives, programs, services, and special events. Inside Santa Clara is currently produced 3 times a year and is mailed directly to nearly 58,000 residential and business addresses in Santa Clara. The newsletter is also available in print at all city facilities, as well as online on santaclaraca.gov. And if we could bring the presentation up, that would be great because we're now on slide 2. For some context, the newsletter has maintained the same format and design for at least the last 20 years. And as you can imagine, the public's reading habits and methods for consuming information has changed dramatically over the last couple of decades. And with that in mind, the goals for redesigning Inside Santa Clara include improve the design layout and use of photos to support the city brand, enhance readability for our diverse community, incorporate 4-color printing, enhance the design for viewing the publication online, and evaluate the size and type of paper that's used for publishing while still being able to contain inserts like the water quality report and be cost-effective for mailing. Next slide, please. We officially launched the redesign project in January. Now, this came right after procuring the creative services expertise of a graphics design firm through a competitive process. Now, for the redesign process, city staff conducted public outreach about a new look and feel for Inside Santa Clara through an online survey, the city's Economic Development Communications and Marketing Committee, leadership Santa Clara participants, social media, and in person. So the overall feedback we received was positive, that a redesign was needed, and comments focused on modernizing the newsletter. We heard there was a desire for a more colorful design, 4-color design, and making it easier to read while on the go. Now, consistently, the overall community input was to continue mailing the publication rather than only providing a digital copy on the city website. Over the last few months, the city's communications office has been collaborating with the graphic design consultant as well as city staff from all departments to fine-tune the redesigned newsletter. Next slide, please. So in a few minutes, you'll see here's what the newsletter looks like currently. This is before the redesign. And with the current design, it's not necessarily geared for today's audience and their reading habits. It's hard to know exactly where to look, what articles may be of interest, as well as maintaining visual interest. Let's go to the next slide, please. And as you'll soon see, a sample of the redesigned newsletter. And I would like to acknowledge Communications and Outreach Manager Lon Peterson for his efforts as well as creative mindset in leading this collaborative project and helping us achieve the project objectives. The new Inside Santa Clara reflects a modern layout, reformatted content to improve readability, and an updated design for viewing on the go, really to make it easier for someone viewing the publication online, as well as on their mobile device. The color palette, typography, and layout are representative of the innovation and ingenuity that are part of the city's brand. Now, the length of the newsletter has been reduced to about 8 to 12 pages from roughly 20 pages, with content organized to improve the reader experience. It's also presented in a magazine-style format that better markets what the center of what's possible truly represents. Next slide, please. So looking ahead at next steps, the new Inside Santa Clara is scheduled to make its debut for the summer edition, arriving in mailboxes sometime in June. And the focus will be on the city's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And an online survey will follow to collect feedback from the community about the redesigned Inside Santa Clara. And that concludes my presentation. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Boy, that what a difference. Makes it very readable, and I really like the design. So are there any council members? I don't see them, so Assistant City Clerk? Councilmember Davis.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Lenka, thank you for doing this. I know this was something in economic development, but we haven't had one of those meetings in a very long time. But my question to you is, you're saying a launch date of June, but then you're still going out and asking questions of the people, the residents, today's the 14th. So how are you doing that in such a short timeline?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Davis, for this question. The outreach that we did actually was back in January, and a little preliminary work for where we are today. The outlook, the online survey that I mentioned is post-launch, so that way, what you're going to see in the summer edition is not the end of our redesign process. We will continue to get feedback from the community, and we will be doing that through an online survey as well as email and other methods of outreach, so that way we can really fine-tune the publication as we unveil the new look and feel for Inside Santa Clara for the summer.
Okay, so you're kind of telling me it's a moving target right now until we get it to its perfect phase, I guess. My next question is, when you say magazine style, can you tell me what the size is? Is it like 11 by 18? Like, what does that look like? Because the other Inside Santa Clara is a long tabloid type paper that's folded in half. So are you saying that you're making it more in that smaller size for people to open up like a magazine? So that's why I was at, what size is that going to look like?
Yeah, it's when I say magazine style, it's kind of like the design format. It will be a little bit smaller than what the current tabloid size is. It's 8.5 by 11. So, and this is to make it easier to carry with one if you're waiting for appointments. So just making it a little bit easier for the reader to consume the publication.
Okay, so an 8.5 by 11 format. Okay, then my next question is, you reduced it from 20 pages, you said, to 8 to 12, and you again said 3 years. Are we going back to the 4-year publication if you're reducing the size of the content?
Oh, and Councilmember Davis, I do have a correction. It's actually going to be 11 by 17. Sorry about that. And in regards to how many times a year, at this time, the recommendation is to maintain the newsletter's production to 3 times a year, and that's in order to reduce expenditures in light of COVID-19 fiscal impacts on the city's budget. And in addition, city staffing resources for producing another issue of the newsletter are limited due to the focus on providing timely emergency public information about the coronavirus outbreak in our region.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for all the time and effort that went into this. It is a far cry from what we've had in the past. And I like the fact that you're doing places to go and things to do, because we hear a lot about that. And also activities for our people. So I think you did a great job. I can't wait to see what this looks like in June. So thank you very much, Lenka, and your team.
Thank you so much, Council Member.
Are there any other council members? Okay, well, is there any member of the public? Oh, yes.
Councilmember Watanabe would like to speak.
Councilmember Watanabe.
Just a quick question. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Lenka, for the presentation. This is very exciting and very colorful. Based on the fact that you're going from 20 pages to 8 to 12 pages, is there a cost savings here, or does it balance out, or will it be more because of the 4-color design? What kind of a cost are we looking at here in comparing it to the previous Inside Santa Clara?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councilmember Watanabe. The estimated production costs annually is about $10,000 less than it was for the current publication. And that amounts to, with these cost savings, it's about 68 cents per print copy. So we were able to save some costs with bringing writing, editing services in-house. And of course, we're also looking at the printing costs, so that way, with moving to 4-color, that we can still keep all the costs in check.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. That's good to hear, especially when you're looking at something that's more colorful and is we're expecting it's going to be a much better product. So it's good to know that it'll cost less. So thank you very much again for all of your hard work.
Great. Thank you, Council Member.
Councilmember Chahal would like to speak.
Councilmember Chahal?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Lanka. Great job. And I do have some suggestion or down the line if you can incorporate that. You know, we are following our My Santa Clara app and Nextdoor and other feedback from our residents. And that feedback is both, like we hear about the issues we are facing within the city and also kudos, like where we have done a great job for our residents. So I would like if we can add a column or a page where we recap for the last 3 months or 4 months for that particular quarter. What are the major issues faced by our residents and what are the major achievements we did for the residents directly as per their feedback. That's just a suggestion.
Great. Thank you, Council Member. That is duly noted.
Thank you.
Are there other council members that want to say anything? All right, thank you. Lenka, great job. Thank you to you and your team. Our residents do rely on this publication a lot. There's a lot of information that we really pack into these things, and the easier it is for them to read and get this pertinent information, the better. But I think that, you know, they're going to be more inclined to really dig into it when it looks as nice as it does, and there's an ease of reading some of these and getting out some of this important information. So thank you. I know that the community really does appreciate and rely on this to get city information. So is this just a note and file? Do we know?
Yes, just note and file.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to note and file?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, that's
Second.
Councilmember O'Neill, second by Councilmember Chahal. Let me ask, do we have any public comment or input? Any public members here? No public members here? Okay. All right, so Assistant City Clerk?
Vice Mayor Hardy.
Yes.
Councilmember O'Neill.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Watanabe.
Yes.
Councilmember Chahal.
Yes.
And Mayor Gilmore.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that passes unanimously to note and file that item. And again, thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, which is public presentations. Do we have any public presentations? Has anyone zoomed in or commented or no one's here in the cafeteria? Okay, so we do not have any public presentations. All right, we're going to move on to the 3 items we have on the Stadium Authority agenda. And the first is item 9, financial status report. Action on the Santa Clara Stadium Authority financial status report for quarter ending December 31st, 2019. And so that would be the 3rd quarter of the Stadium Authority's fiscal year. Stadium Authority Executive Director.
I'm sorry, I forgot to take myself off of mute. As part of our presentation today, we're going to present the information for the 3rd quarter for the Stadium Authority, as well as incorporated are some slides for 9B, which provides some fiscal activity that is currently that we currently want to report related to COVID pandemic, as well as since we've last been before the board with the budget. So Ken, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Deanna, and Honorable Mayor and Stadium Authority Board. I will be sharing my screen, so let me pull that up for the presentation. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Before I start my presentation, I just wanted to introduce Rachel Copes, a Senior Management Analyst. She's joining me on the Zoom call as well. She is the nuts and bolts behind a lot of the numbers here. She joined us late last year in November, and I'm very happy to have her on board to help me with the Stadium Authority financial transactions in this report. Before you is the third quarter report for the Stadium Authority. It's an update that we provide quarterly. As Deanna mentioned, I will be covering some of the elements on the informational memo around the COVID-19 impacts as well. From an agenda perspective, I will be talking through the methodology used in the report, providing a summary of non-NFL and NFL event activity, including parking and public safety, a discussion of our operating budget status, including SBLs or Stadium Builder licenses, the discretionary fund, status of our debt, CIP, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 impacts and other issues. So just to spend a moment here from a methodology and limitation standpoint, the information provided in the quarterly report reflects the best information known at the time provided by ManCo or management company. Some of the information for some of the events do continue to change throughout the course of the fiscal year based on additional invoices or additional adjustments that are made up until the closure of the fiscal year. For some source documentation for events greater than 25,000, we have initiated a review of those documentation with management company, and some of that is provided in the report as well. For all other events, the financial information or source documentation is not reviewed, but what is provided from the management company is included in the report. And then the last bullet there, as the board may be aware, we do have a forensic accountant reviewing prior year non-NFL event financial information. Because of COVID-19, that report's been delayed, but the work effort is significantly completed and expected later this year. From an NFL perspective, as a reminder, 10 events were held through quarter three or through December 31st, 2019. There were 2 playoff games subsequent or after quarter three, and those numbers are not reflected for those playoff games as part of this report. Total tickets sold were up 1.3% year over year. And of those tickets, the Stadium Authority receives a 10% ticket sales surcharge, so $8.4 million received through Q3, and then the City of Santa Clara receives senior and youth fees based on 35 cents a ticket, and so that totaled roughly $231,000 so far through Q3. From a parking perspective, the chart here shows the parking revenue and numbers through the 10 games. 64,000, just shy of 65,000 cars were parked, generating $380,000 in parking fees. These fees are used to offset public safety costs that I'll talk about on the next slide. As far as the Tasman lots, 5,751 cars parked, roughly $29,000 in fees for the general fund. As far as public safety costs for NFL events, the total amounted to approximately $3.7 million. That consisted of $2.7 million of direct city costs and about $1 million of outside agency costs, and that breakdown is provided for you there. And again, the $380,000 from parking fees offsets a portion of these costs. For non-NFL events, there were 8 ticketed events total, and approximately 184,000 tickets were sold. And the revenue that flows to the Stadium Authority from non-NFL ticketed events is based on the $4 ticket surcharge per ticket. Half of that comes to the Stadium Authority for operations, and the other half is provided to the discretionary fund. And so just by way of numbers, this is 37% less than prior years, primarily due to lower attendance when you compare year to year activity. When you look at non-ticketed events, these are the private events, the corporate Christmas parties, the wedding events. And so there were a total of 64 non-ticketed events with approximately 22,000 attendees and again, about 32% less than the prior year. As far as some of the numbers here, again, I do want to disclaim that the numbers still move around because of invoices we continue to receive. Here's the breakdown of the net revenue by event type. So the concert there is the Rolling Stones that made $872,000. On the sporting side, the non-NFL football, primarily the large loss there is due to the Pac-12 championship. And then on the plus side, I do want to report the non-ticketed events made roughly $2 million here. So if all things equal, if the quarter was the year end, we would net out $24,000 to the general fund. But again, that number will change as Q4 information is provided and additional invoices are provided. When you look at the event by event activity for ticketed events, you'll see here that 6 of the 8 events lost money or did not make money, highlighted in red there. The largest loss was the Pac-12 championship I mentioned earlier. The largest gain was the Rolling Stones concert. At the time of the budget production in mid-March, Manco had projected about a $1.7 to $2 million loss this fiscal year. So as we close out the books, we'll bring forward an update to that number later in this year. From a parking perspective, across the different events, this chart shows parking activity. A total of 17,000 cars were parked. Offsite in lots, down 34%. They generated $98,000 in parking fees, and again, that's used to offset public safety costs, which are shown on this slide. Approximately $1.6 million in public safety costs. The bulk of those, 85%, are direct city costs, and about $227,000 are outside agency costs listed there. And again, this is offset partially by the parking fee. From an operating budget perspective, I did want to summarize that, total operating revenues amounted to just shy of $43 million, or 58% of the budget. Total operating expenses, roughly $30 million, or 40% of the annual budget. Now, these numbers are skewed a little bit because of the reporting of revenue and expenses related to non-NFL event, which happens at the end of the year per agreement. So those dollars are not reflected here. It also does reflect the suspension of shared stadium manager expenses based on board direction to release funds only for supporting documentation. So that's part of why the expenses here are low through Q3, and I'll talk about that more as part of the revolving loan discussion later in this presentation. As far as stadium builder licenses, SBLs, these revenues are primarily used to pay off the stadium debt, and so from an activity standpoint, $528 million was sold to date or through Q3, or 91% of sellable SBLs. Of that amount, 84% has been collected, or $441 million. So there are a handful of SBLs on payment plans that we will continue to collect principal on that throughout the life of the SBL. 785 new SBLs were sold for a total face value of $4.7 million, and that's through Q3. As far as relocations on SBLs, 83 relocations netted an increase of just shy of $800,000 in face value. And then defaults for SBLs totaled about $9.8 million, or approximately 1,400 items there. And so when an SBL is defaulted, what the management company does is they put that back on the market and they resell those seats or those licenses at full price. So the discretionary fund is a balance in the Stadium Authority budget for unforeseen or discretionary purposes. In the past, this balance was used to offset the cost of public safety costs for the first 3 years. Those costs were refunded. The remaining refund for public safety is under litigation. As you can see in here, the balance totals approximately $2.3 million in the discretionary fund. From a debt perspective, through December 2019, outstanding debt totaled $325.8 million, a reduction of $14.5 million from the March 2019 date. And there, the bulk of those costs were related to the fixed debt for Term A loan. This was the first year that payments have begun on that. So again, $325 million in outstanding debt. If you look at the total debt over the life of the stadium, we have accelerated those debt payments beyond what was projected initially. And so the hope here is we continue to do that. When you look at the capital budget through Q3, very little dollars have been spent. Projects have continued to be halted due to procurement issues and prevailing wage issues around noncompliance. We are dialoguing with the management company on the status of those projects. We're expecting them to report back a status, and we continue to work with them on procurement issues and hope to keep progressing in that area. But again, the dollars here, very little dollars spent against the $14 million budget. We are concerned from a maintenance of the asset that these projects continue, and so we will continue to dialogue with the management company. So with that, I wanted to transition to item 9B in the agenda packet around COVID-19. And the Stadium Authority did ask MANCO for a response to the COVID-19 impacts, and the response from MANCO was business as usual. They did state in a recent quarterly meeting that they would not be spending any less on shared stadium manager expenses as we had hoped and anticipated through the adoption of the budget. They did state they would not furlough any staff, that they would not be providing any impacts on game revenue or NFL event revenue. We had expressed concerns around the ticket surcharge and SBL revenue and what that impact would be on the Stadium Authority. We did finally receive a response late on May 7th, shortly before the agenda packet went out. That response validated their position of business as usual. And so in the meantime, the Stadium Authority did provide, or my staff did take a look at the scenarios of what revenue and expense assumptions could be foreseen looking forward if no events or a reduced level of activity was at the stadium. And so that was provided in the report before you. We did model several different scenarios, all of which anticipate a reduction in revenue, primarily around the ticket surcharges for NFL and non-NFL events, and then also an assumption around SBL sales, assuming that with the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic impact across the region, that would potentially have an impact on SBL sales. So when you look at those reduced revenues, we looked at some of the operating savings that would be required to continue to make minimum debt payments. And we presented three options. The first option was the as status quo budget, and that resulted in operating deficit around $8 million or so. And then the second two options we did provide reflect a reduced operations assumption around both marketing activities, maintenance activities, and then also maintaining some of the vacancies across the Stadium Authority to generate some savings. And as a result of that, the analysis showed we would have to dip into some reserves by the end of the year, assuming no events occur. Some of the other issues that were highlighted in the informational report center around the revolving loan fund. As you may recall, the board directed the Stadium Authority to withhold payment unless proper backup documentation was provided. And so that direction was presented to and approved at the middle of last year. And as a result of those non-payments, the management company elected to pull a revolving loan per our agreement. This is a revolving loan that we dispute as the Stadium Authority. Very recently, we sent them a response letter where they diverted some of the excess revenue from the past fiscal year to pay off that loan. They made that decision themselves without Stadium Authority consent or approval, and without the trustee consent or approval. So that is an ongoing issue that we're dealing with. Around Levy Premium Food Services, we did receive a warn letter, and that letter indicates that they intended to reduce hours and or lay off staff, approximately 600 staff members at the stadium providing food service. So there's a definite impact to employees around the stadium. The BNY Melon Club buffet costs, these are costs that we received an invoice very recently totaling $4.4 million for the 2014 to 2018 NFL event year. And so based on agreements, they believe that this is funding. These are costs that the Stadium Authority owes back to Stadco for reimbursement of buffet costs. Again, our legal team took a look at that and are disputing those invoices. And so we replied yesterday to the management company on that invoice. The last two bullets here are items we continue to work through: status of outstanding payments. As of earlier this week, a total of $3.6 million or so is outstanding from Stadco and Manco. A portion of those dollars are subject to litigation currently in process. Approximately 1.6 million of those costs are related to public safety invoices that we have invoiced from the February through May timeframe. We did get a small payment late Friday, so we continue to dialogue with them on the status of payments to ensure that those payments are made. And then the last bullet there, I included around our billings or general administrative costs and public safety costs. We apply a 10% or so overhead rate. The stadium manager continues to dispute that, and so we are spending some staff time researching the calculation and basis for that. We have talked to Matrix Consulting, our consultant who provided analysis around the overhead rate and cost allocation plan. So we'll continue to work through those issues, the issues on this list that take considerable time, but we did want to provide an update to the board regarding some of these issues. And so with that, that concludes my presentation. Again, the recommendation here is to note and file both 9A and 9B, the third quarter financial status report for the quarter ending December 31, 2019, and also the information report that was provided to the board. And with that, staff and I are available for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ken, for that report, and Rachel for your work as well on this. I'm going to start with Authority Member Davis.
Thank you, Mayor. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Ken, I know that this is one of our favorite reports and probably one of yours to do, but I need to go to page number 10. And we were shut down, I believe, by the county, Dr. Cody, on March 16th. So who all is working at the stadium if there is nothing going on? And that's my first question. Do we know if there's people actually there? And then second, how does that affect the shared expenses? Because if they're working there for NFL purposes, I don't see them working for our purposes when we don't have any non-NFL things going on. So could you explain that or have them explain that to the board? And I have more questions for you, but that's the first one.
Council member, that was our intent of asking the stadium manager for a report. As you know, we have been updating the city council on the COVID impacts related to the city organization, the convention center, as well as SVP was the most recent report that we provided. We did ask them about, given the nature of COVID, that there should be an immediate action on the expense base, and that what we need is very different now than the budget at the time. I should also mention that many of the shared expenses were not approved by the board, and yet that's the result is that they instead have taken from the revolving loan fund to fund the shared expenses. We've asked for that detail. They've not provided it to us in terms of who's working, who's not working. They've provided just very high level of information that work still needs to get done, and no list of staffing or cost. Ken, I don't know if you have additional detail.
Chair?
I would just want to. It sounds like Brian wants to say something.
Yes, go ahead.
I just want
City
to
Attorney, or Stadium
also
Authority.
inform the board that they have triggered a dispute resolution process on the budget. And one of the issues that we discussed at a meet and confer with their counsel was exactly this, how they could say with a straight face that there's no change in the budget based upon the fact that there's no activity at the stadium. And their answers during that discussion were completely I think to the point of disingenuous. They replied that there's merely a skeletal crew at the stadium itself, simply to keep the building secure and the lights on. But there was no explanation whatsoever as to what the people who were there doing, and who the people on the payroll that they're charging us for, what they're doing to the benefit of the non-NFL part of the season.
Okay, so Brian, with that being said, the city manager brought up, she kind of fed into my next question. We received information that they used the revolving loan to pay their April debt of shared expense that they're looking for this, they used that revolving loan to pay for something we have no idea. And Brian basically laid it out and said, where is the documentation to back up you even using the revolving loan? So I guess Brian or Deanna, how do we stop them from using the revolving loan if this is totally disingenuous? They are not supplying information for this. And if it's not been approved by the board, how are they getting away with this?
Well, it's our hope that they won't ultimately get away with it. The way the revolving loan works is they make us borrow money from them to pay them. So it's really just kind of an accounting thing where they're charging us interest on money that they are paying themselves. So ultimately, I mean, the last year's revolving loan disputes are already in arbitration, and it appears that they would likely try to put this year's revolving loan dispute into litigation as well. But they're basically loaning money to us to then pay themselves. So we'll see when this is ultimately resolved, God knows when, hopefully we'll be made whole.
Okay, so
I would only add that they're loaning money to us for us to pay without any details for which the purpose of expending those funds are for.
Which is absolutely ludicrous. So my question, okay, so then that leads into another question. When Ken said we might have to use reserves, how much do we have in reserves to take care of the debt?
Great question. So we do have a couple reserves. So when we're looking at the operations in the sense of COVID impact, there's a roughly, I want to say, $11 million reserve for operations, and then there's another reserve, I believe, for the debt. I want to say it's $2 million or so. So we do, when we did our projections around the COVID impacts, and that we would have to dip into reserves, the scenario 3 that we provided was roughly $1 million that we would have to dip into reserves. Out of that, roughly 11 million or so in operating reserves. Now, the hope here is that at some point, some level of activity through the fiscal year would generate some revenues to at least operate in the black from an operations standpoint. But again, we do have about 11 million of reserves set aside.
Okay, Ken, how far is that going to take us in the economy right now? And what's happening if that stadium is not opened for this season, is that going to carry us through the end of their fiscal year, I believe, which is March, correct, of 2021? Because we have a different budget cycle with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And the assumptions that we're making when we come up with the projections, I mean, we assume that they would continue to pay their fixed rents of roughly 25 million or so. We assume that a portion of SBL sales and payments would continue, and so those revenues primarily would be used to fund the minimum debt payment that's required and some minimal operation. So if those assumptions hold, the roughly million or so deficit in the year would be covered by reserves. The reserves would, only to the extent that our assumptions are correct and that the Stadco continues to pay rent and continues to sell SBLs, that reserve's there to provide a buffer. Now, again, those activities and those assumptions have to prove true. Otherwise, we would have to tap into the reserves further.
Okay, this doesn't sound good to me, but you've answered my questions, but it sounds like it's going to be another litigation thing on their part and coming after us. And I can't understand why they would even come after us when, we are under this, Dr. Cody shut the things down on March 16th. So how in Lord's name do they have any kind of debt at that stadium, or even to, have the audacity to use a revolving loan to pay debt? And I mean, this is like ridiculous. And then charge us interest to pay them. I mean, that to me is just totally irresponsible on their part. I hope that they have some kind of answer for you, but it sounds like Brian has got that under control as far as the city attorney or the stadium authority attorney. But I know this is a note and file. I hesitate to do it, but I guess we have to. We have no choice because we're not dealing with honest people here. But the other thing I just wanted is a comment. I heard Al Michaels, who's one of their narrators for a football game, say that they were actually expecting to open Levi Stadium October 4th for a game, not including like the fan experience, but at the same time, I mean, have they given you or any of the stadium management any indication that they are actually planning on opening up that stadium in that time frame?
So we did, as the NFL season schedule came out last Friday, as well as the media covering the comments around the training facilities, we did submit a request to the county for information about how to proceed, given the state orders as well as the county orders. The county did not respond because, as of this, they did not provide guidance because these facilities should not be open. So we have a standing request into the county to provide us guidance for the facility training as well as the stadium. But because their county's orders are not even entertaining those, they're not responding in terms of how to guide the reopening. So I think that's quite easy to read their response.
Okay, thank you so much. And Mayor, I'd like to make a motion when appropriate, just to note and file staff recommendation.
Okay, you can actually make that now because we'll end up getting people's comments. So that's a motion to note and file. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. So at least, thank you, we have that on the table. All right, Vice Mayor Hardy?
Thank you. Can I have a few specific number questions and then a question or two that may be more for Deanna and Brian? As we know, this is a note and file, but it is what I affectionately call my headache meetings. On slide number 5, Ken, you talked about the Stadium Authority receives $8.4 million in NFL ticket surcharges. Is that what we use? Is that the $8.4 million? Does that go into what our costs for the stadium, or does that go towards our debt?
So the $8.4 million goes into our operating fund,
Okay.
and that is the same fund we pay for operations, but it's also the same fund that we pay for debt. So that revenue is important both from a debt and operations standpoint.
So I guess I'm looking forward, because one of the ideas that's been floated as far as football season in the fall is having games with no audience except for a television audience. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we would not have ticket revenue if that is the situation, correct?
I believe that's the case, correct.
Not good news. This revolving loan that we're also unhappy about, do you know what kind of interest rate they're trying to charge us?
I think it's pegged off of one of the Fed prime rates. I believe, I want to say it's in the 2 to 4%, but I can get back to you specifically if you would like, but I want to say
No.
it's in the 2 to 4%.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to have a handle on what that was.
Yeah, it is pegged to one of the federal rates. So, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the $4.4 million in the buffet costs, and those are a total that go way back to 2014, if I'm understanding correctly, the opening year.
That's correct. It represents the buffet costs for 2014 to 2018 season.
And do you know of what the reason for that not being given to us each year, or why that was brought forward now? Was there any understanding?
I do not know the reasoning. I mean,
Okay.
I only know that, it became an issue starting in, I believe, the 1920 development of the budget. But as far as why they did not forward those costs or book those costs or tell us about those costs, I can't wager to guess.
Yep. Thank you. I was afraid of that. And very quickly in your oral presentation, you mentioned a 10% overhead when we were discussing our operational costs. Could you explain that a bit more to me?
Sure. So as with any organization, when you have general and administrative staff time and/or public safety time, there's overhead costs tied to that. So, for example, for our public safety officers that work in an event, there's HR costs, finance costs, payroll costs, just as a standard practice of business. And so, our agreements with them allow for an overhead. In the past, the 10% overhead that I had talked about was previously negotiated by back way in the beginning when this was kicking off, and so we've applied that 10%. We've adjusted that amount based on a consulting report that we've taken a look at, and so they continue to dispute that. They continue to ask us for backup. They continue to ask us for recalculation of portions of that. So we're all of which we're looking at, we're listening to, but it just takes time and resources to kind of research years and years and years of application of.
So this is part of the back and forth contention over costs, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, this is one of many back and forths, but this is one that we continue to dialogue with them on.
Thank you. I have two more quick questions.
Chair,
Yes.
I just wanted to interject something about the overhead costs.
Please.
The overhead cost is a function of Measure J. Measure J forbids the spending of general fund money on stadium authority operation and expenses. So it's necessary that we charge every dollar that these are city dollars being spent by city staff. And although there was a quote unquote agreement about the percentage, that was always, that's our call. It's not their call. We have to, the previous administration was not, nor are we, this administration, able to agree to anything less than what Measure J requires, because that was an ordinance passed by the vote of the people. So in terms of charging that overhead cost, it is a requirement of Measure J that we recapture that overhead, those overhead costs that the city is incurring as a result of having to have staff spend time on the stadium. And so I just wanted everyone to be aware that it's not something that we can really negotiate with them. We're all subject to the people's ordinance, which was Measure J.
Thank you, City Attorney.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because that leads into my next question. The litigation costs we're having, and this would be for Counsel for Brian. The litigation costs are those? Do we know approximately how much that is a year, and are we charging back from the city to the stadium authority for those costs?
Well, let me answer the first question. The second question first. We pay all of the litigation costs that are related to the stadium out of stadium authority funds. We do not use any general fund money from the city to pay for the stadium authority litigations. In terms of an exact number, I can't give you. I can definitely tell you it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. It probably does exceed millions of dollars. I know that the city was, luckily the stadium authority was able to recover over $2 million in attorney's fees that it expended on the rent arbitration, and that was over the period of about 2 years of work. So I think, that's about the ballpark we're talking in terms of the amount of time and expense that the stadium authority funds are being used to simply to deal with these folks. While we're on the subject, I just would like to add, it does take away from my ability, although the stadium authority is paying for the time and our outside counsel costs, it does take away from my availability to work on city issues. And and we continue to get additional claims for millions and millions of dollars from the York family, from the people who own the 49ers. They literally came after us this year, just recently, for another $5 million. And I personally find it extremely disgusting and offensive that they're hitting their home community with these types of claims when I'm trying, with my time and my effort to feed the children of Santa Clara, feed the older folks of Santa Clara, help small businesses of Santa Clara, and they're diverting my attention and the attention of many other people at the city from being able to do that at the same time that they're trying to deplete our resources. It's very, very disheartening.
I appreciate that. And I feel like this is a note and file for the board, but it's also for our residents to understand some of the realities. I have one last question. I'm not certain this would be more for Deanna, for City Mayor Santana, or for Ken. Our police costs, sometimes I've heard the costs are high. We did look through what they are, but are we comparing our police costs to other stadiums in the Bay Area or other large venues? Are we out of line? Are we right where we should be? are we low? I'd like to have more of a handle on, because those police costs seem high to me.
We would have to do research to benchmark against San Francisco's cost of delivering services, probably not Oakland at this point. I can share, though, that just through the agreements themselves and the structure of how public safety services are provided, we are charging what the costs are what's built in within the cost structure for police and fire.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if there's any suggestion of offer of a discount or anything, that would have to result in some sort of subsidy. So even if we did have a comparison, for benchmarking, the purpose wouldn't really serve a purpose because these are our costs to provide public safety. Ken, I heard you chime in. You may want to add more.
I was just going to add that the deployment model for the police and fire, that's something that both chiefs take a look at the event based on risk. And so we do pay and we do show the full cost of public safety based on the recommended deployments that are for each game.
Okay, thank you so much. I wish we had better news, but it is news. Thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to add, Vice Mayor Karen Hardy, you said you believe the costs are high. If you have any information that the costs are high, please give it to our executive director so that we can look at what you have, how you based your statements on that. All right, Authority Member O'Neill.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll chime in first a little bit about the public safety costs, and actually on the question that Vice Chair Hardy just raised, I actually had some conversations with our prior chief of police and kind of talked to him about that. And I think, if I recall the conversation and some of the information he gave me, and some that in some ways Santa Clara was a little higher, and some of what I was hearing was like, well, we didn't want to tolerate certain behaviors at Levi Stadium in the city of Santa Clara that maybe other cities would, allow. But one of the things I do want to do, one of my little issues, back when in the early days of the first couple years of the stadium, we did spend several $100,000 on a police study. And part of that was, and it was led by the recently retired chief of police of Pasadena, who has the Rose Bowl, and the Rams were playing there at the time, as addition to UCLA and all. And I know that at that time, he raised some issues, and in that report called into question some of the things that had been done, like in the public safety plan, which I believe, and this is no criticism of who's executing the plan. I think our police and fire and dispatchers and all our public works people have done a fabulous job. But I do recall that there was some discussion about the way that the public safety plan was initially designed. So I'll just leave that as a comment. And like I said, some of those were from with conversations I had directly with our retired chief of police. So Ken, one of my fears, and maybe Brian knows this too. So you mentioned that we're in litigation about the public safety costs because, one of the things I've advocated for since the stadium opened was that we'd had a dramatic scope change, and this gets back to the public safety plan and how we were going to deploy city resources. And thus, we should have had a renegotiation from that point once the scope had changed. But if we do not prevail in this dispute about the public safety costs, so will we then go back to the discretionary fund? Because I know for several years where some of the extra parking revenues and some of the extra revenues that by the formula go into the discretionary fund were being used to pick up the deficit on the public safety costs, because as our city attorney explained, we can't have any of these costs flowing back to the general fund. And so the discretionary fund
was being used for the those to cover those costs. Is that the plan, that we would go back to the discretionary fund if we had to?
Well, the way it's worded is it comes either out of the performance rent or the discretionary funds, but you're correct, it can't come out of the general fund. So what happens with the public safety costs is they are city expenditures, but they have to be billed back to the stadium authority. For the what we've referred to as the cap is the amount of money that the 49ers themselves pay for the public safety costs, not the stadium authority. So all public safety costs are paid for by the stadium authority, not the city. I don't want to, I prefer not to discuss what happens in terms of the arbitration on the public safety costs, but in no event could the arbitration result in the city having to pay the public safety costs for the stadium.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, and then my next question, can you mention that we do have a forensic accounting firm currently engaged that's looking into, so are they looking at the revenues and expenses for all events, or is it just the non-NFL events? Or can you clarify, is it all events or just the non-NFL events?
They're looking at non-NFL primarily for the first 3 or 4 years of operation. So, but they are looking at all the revenues and expenses for all non-NFL events for those fiscal years.
Okay. And is anybody looking? I mean, because I know one of our other issues we have is about the parking. Because one of the things that's kind of been somewhat amazing to me, if you look at the numbers on cars parked, whether, through looking at the Tasman lot, the golf course, the off-site lot, and when you consider that the golf course hasn't been used for several seasons now, and yet when you look at the numbers of cars parked, they've dropped dramatically. So I'm either thinking, is that correct? Or I would like to think that all those thousands of people are coming on, whether it's VTA bus or light rail or Capitol Corridor, to the games. But not that they're parking in neighborhoods or whatever, but have we verified those parking numbers, or how are we approaching that?
So as far as parking, some of the numbers around parking, I mean, the drop-off is consistent with the drop-off in just general attendance for non-NFL games. And so when you're looking at a 35% or so drop from non-NFL events, we're finding that parking is consistent with that. I'd have to go back and check in terms of the review process for that and the verification process for that and get back to the board.
Yeah, because even if you look at the NFL event and the football games, it seems like the numbers for parking have gone down. Okay, so also, I think it is, and the report references this. When you look at the numbers for food and beverage, and there's like kind of two categories on the I think it was on the expenses side. Are we reviewing, like, kind of like, and I don't know if, I know that the stadium authority has now hired VB, for the stadium as well as for the convention center, but it seems to, like food and beverage, I mean, that should be the area for something like a stadium where I would think, and for these events, I would think that would be a huge money maker. And even for the things like, corporate banquets and stuff like that, has there been discussion about why those numbers look the way they did on food and beverage?
So around food and beverage, and I think you're referring to Table 7 in the report on page 10, is primarily around how they book and account for food and beverage costs and revenue. So on the expense side, they do break out for ticketed and non-ticketed special events, the food and beverage costs. And what we don't see or what we don't know from a accounting standpoint is some of those food and beverage costs are booked in a food and beverage line item. Some of them are included or booked as part of a broader seating bowl revenue. So without the transparent accounting of food and beverage, it's really difficult for us to really see what the true revenue and expense are around that. We are hoping that with, we are in the middle of procurement for a separate financial management system. We're hoping that through that process, we review the business process that they have, and as far as tracking some of these separate activities, both on the revenue and expense side, that would give us more transparency. There's as far as a recommendation for award.
Okay, thank you. And then I have something more. One of my other things that I've been worried about over the last in the threshold of events in the naming rights contract with Levi's, about where if I think it's like 25 non-NFL events a year over a certain size, if I recall correctly. And then if not, then our payments are reduced. And I noticed it seemed like that we're looking at that, we're hoping to hold steady. Are we thinking for this, particularly the end of the fiscal year that just ended, and going forward, that are we potentially going to have to talk to, or have we had any discussion with Levi about whether they may want to invoke that?
So as part of the adopted budget process, we did project out that we were going to run short of the requirement over a rolling 3-year period for events over 25,000 in attendance. And so that liability or that payment, because we don't meet the number of events, is covered by the stadium. So as part of the budget, the budgeting of that payment back to Levi's for not meeting that event threshold, and the revenue coming in from the 49ers was assumed in the budget. That was part of our question and answer follow-up with them. They acknowledged that, and as far as that transaction and potential payment back to Levi's.
Okay. So then one of the other things is the CFD revenues. And I'm trying to remember with that facilities district, that's not based on that. That's just like a flat, that's like a tax to them, or please help me refresh my memory. That wasn't based on like rooms rented, was it? Because I'm just thinking, is there a chance that either that's going to go down, or are the hotels on the hook for that, regardless of whether they are open or not?
So the CFD revenue is a percentage of room revenue, and so to the extent the hotels in that CFD district are shut, it would impact the CFD revenue stream to pay the debt. Now, we've accelerated the payment tremendously, just because up until the COVID pandemic, both room rates and occupancy rates were so high. We were significantly paying ahead on that debt, and so that debt is entirely covered by the hotels, and would be the responsibility of the hotels. And so it's something that we need to continue to look forward and look at as far as the minimum payments for the CFD and the hotel activity, and when those hotels are slated to come back online.
Great. My last question has to do with the infamous buffet, which I guess they're not going to be having any buffets anymore if the current environment of public health standards prevails. But we know that they didn't give us a number to build into our budget, and I didn't even know that they would that was a freebie for SBL holders. I thought I heard that there were buffets going on, but I thought that was a cost if you were a suite holder, that was just part of what your monthly cost was. But since we didn't have any notice on that, and they weren't, invoicing us, what is typically a time limit? I mean, particularly for the fall of 2014. I mean, we're talking about 5.5 years, coming up on 6 years. Is there, maybe Brian can help with this. Is there a legal limit on how far back you can go and try to present invoices for payment?
We Ken and I wrote a letter back to them on the past claim for buffet costs. I don't know if you've received a copy of that, but we kind of cover some of the defenses we think we have to them making this claim. It's a letter that we wrote yesterday, but we can get you a copy of that letter if you don't have it.
Yeah, I think, but so I wasn't sure though. Just okay, all right. I'll look at it.
In general, under the contract, they do have a duty to include all these types of costs within each budget, and they didn't do that, and they're all supposed to be accounting that way in order to prevent this type of year-to-year, shocking claims for past due amounts. So that's one of the things we mentioned in the letter. But in general, it's from an accounting standpoint and a budgeting standpoint, it's extraordinarily out of order that they should do something like this.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember, Authority Member Chahal.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ken. Thank you for the report, and thank you for good questions. Some of my questions got answered regarding revolving loan fund and other questions, but I have a few other questions. Ken, if we go to table 10 on page 16 for the Q3 numbers, I have several questions. So let me know when you pull that so that you have it handy.
I do have that in front of me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I do, first of all, we are not getting any performance rent. That's not a good news anyway. Other thing is, I see that SBL sales and services, right? That's a jump of around 38%, basically, 38% jump from the previous one. Do we have a breakup of this, like how much of this is a buffet cost and how much is the other related cost?
So we do for fiscal year 1920, approximately 1.2 million of the SBL sales and services was buffet cost. Those some discussion of that was brought to the board in March. The rest of the costs are marketing costs and expenses around the sales of SBLs, the staff cost marketing. If you want specific breakdown of that, I can provide that to the board as follow-up.
Thank you. And my next question is, how is this compared to previous years? Like when we are talking about 3.05 million YTD for 2019-2020, how is this compared to previous? Like I know we are going back to 2014 to 2018. How is this expense compared? Like were the expenses lower when they are asking us $4 million for the previous year, or they already had budgeted this much and earlier?
Correct. So in prior years, that SBL sales and services line item was a lower amount. It did not include, we assume it did not include the buffet with regards to SBL sales and services. It was primarily the marketing and sales staffing costs around the marketing of SBLs. And so 1920 reflected that first year where they started to include those costs, and we later budgeted for those costs, and they did provide the backup from Levy with regards to those costs. So in prior years, that SBL sales and services number was significantly lower.
Okay. And the other question is, when you say marketing and sales expenses, no, we already have sold around 83% of SBL licenses, right? And most of the sales have already happened in the past. So shouldn't our marketing cost be going down compared to what we invested in initial years for the marketing and other stuff, comparing to what right now we are only maintaining those, right? And we are making only few transfers and we are selling few defaults new. So should the cost be, how is the comparison of those costs compared to our previous years?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So I don't know what those costs were on the initial onset of the stadium when it was constructed and built, and the efforts to sell the SBLs throughout the whole stadium. I don't know exactly what those costs were, but you're right. The activity around SBL sales and services are the buffet. There's staff costs related to marketing, defaults and resales, some selling around, upselling or moving of SBLs to different locations. And then there's the services around the SBLs to the extent there are promotion or activities required to give for SBL holders. So I don't have the initial cost of what it costs to sell all the SBLs within the stadium. That's something that we would have to take a look at and see if we have.
Okay. I would be interested in comparing all these costs. No hurries. Like I would be interested in comparing under this head, like SBL sales and stuff, because this is one of the biggest head of the expenses. So I would be interested to find out a comparison from 2014 to date if we can do that breakup of those.
Yeah, I'll take a look and we'll provide that as a subsequent follow-up.
Okay. And that next, my question is regarding the stadium G&A expenses. So was this one also, I see a higher number. Was this as compared to our previous years? Like I would also like to see what's the comparison on these numbers with, because I see on next year we have 4.5 versus 2.4 for this one. So this one has increased substantially too, and our similar to the SBL sales and service, which has substantially increased in our 2021. So I would like some comparisons how these numbers are increasing for both of those comparison-wise.
Sure, and I can add, so the G&A costs are the stadium authority costs, and so I can provide a trend.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this is where a lot of our legal litigation costs are paid out of. So to the extent the last couple of years, some of those litigation costs have grown considerably in the budget, at least for 2021. We did increase that significantly based on the number of lawsuits that the stadium manager has put on the stadium authority.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, and my next questions are few questions based on we have the stadium authority operating budget scenarios ABC for 2021. I do have several questions on those. If you can pull that comparison sheet basically with ABC, let me know when you're ready.
Yes, let me pull that up. So yes, I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay, so my first question is naming rights as revenues. So, I know naming rights is based on number of events in a year with the particular attendance, and as such, do we have any risk of losing this? Although we, on all the three scenarios, A, B, C, we put it at $6.957 million, all the scenarios. Are we in any risk of losing that revenue because of the COVID-19 scenario?
Sure. So our naming rights revenue is a fixed amount from Levi's, and so what we are at risk for and what we're obligated to meet is the number of events greater than 25,000. And so I believe for each event where we're not over 25,000, there's about a $10,000 payment back to Levi's, and so that payment, as I discussed earlier, is included in the 2021 budget, both on the revenue and expense. It's a pass-through that the stadium would have to pay back to the stadium authority to cover what would be due to Levi's.
So basically, we are guaranteed for this income, whatever happens to the number of events or no events, nothing at all. So we are basically guaranteed of that 6.957 million. No risk on that.
That's correct. It was a fixed amount for the agreement.
Okay, perfect. That's good. On the insurance, I see we are taking the same $3.045 million insurance all across the board. I'm not sure what sort of policies we have under the insurance. Like one are the fire and hazard for the stadium, but there may be some liability policies because of the attendance of the games, etc. So should not that be going down? Like if we are not holding any events, our liability of people entering the stadium or joining the stadium for events is reducing a lot. Should we not look at that, like what type of policies are, if we can review those insurance policies so that we can reduce some of these expenses in the current scenario? Did we give a thought to that?
So as it relates to insurance, our agreement with the stadium is a fixed dollar that's paid to the stadium with a 3% increase that's budgeted every year and I believe trued up at year end. And so this amount reflects that fixed dollar, and so it's not one of those line items where based on actual activity, it varies. And so, but I mean, you raise a good point. Would there be any kind of insurance rebates of sorts, provided that there are no events there? I don't know of any, and if so, I believe the terms of the agreement are such that insurance costs are fixed, and so that savings would be captured by the stadium manager.
Oh, so we don't have a clause like if it is less than that, then we should get a benefit of it?
I don't believe so. I think insurance is one of those fixed line items with a 3% escalator, similar to public safety costs, where it's a dollar cap and with an escalator in it.
Yeah, I just want to point out there's a little bit of, can I just mention, there's a little bit of difference between that and the public safety costs. In fact, I think there's quite a bit of difference. The public safety cost is not considered a shared expense. That's an expense of each event. So the insurance cost is a shared expense, and for some reason, and I'm not really sure what the reasoning was, when the lease was brought forward as to how you would allocate the shared expenses, they just put that dollar value in there. I think you raise a good point that I wonder if the premium will go down because it's not occupied. We also have a separate insurance that we've taken out specifically to cover the city's liability for having public safety at the stadium. So we will take a look at whether or not we can bring that premium down because of the fact that the stadium's not in use.
Yeah, exactly.
Councilmember, I just want to add that that's the reason why we asked the stadium manager for update on, given that the board had just approved the budget and then the pandemic and all the orders were announced, we did ask them for that type of information to provide a walkthrough so that we can report to the board, including what the budget revise may be based on cost and things of that sort. But obviously they've declined.
Oh, okay. I know this one was like all of a sudden we got this pandemic, but once down the line, like we should be keeping an eye on it. When the county passes a lockdown situation, we know the stadium cannot be used. So we can be a bit more proactive, at least from our insurance, what coverage the stadium authority is buying. We can be a little bit proactive if we can save some money on that.
We have had some discussions about the insurance policies and the cost over the past years, and we are limited based on the agreements.
Okay. I was just trying to save some money, like whatever we can save in this scenario, that would be great. Right. Okay.
So, one other item I'd just like to point out, I think the audit, when we had the Harvey Rose audit, that was an item that they brought up, that we should try to renegotiate this position, this insurance premium payment. But the 49ers have not been willing to do that.
Okay. And we do not know what the actual cost of the insurance of the stadium is. When we are paying them $3 million, we do not know, right?
I don't believe they've ever told. I don't believe they've ever told us how much they're paying for insurance. It wouldn't be a good situation if the amount of money we're paying for the premium exceeds the cost of the premium that they're paying. So I think we should at least know how much they're paying.
Yeah, I would like to know that. Like if we can modify that clause at least, so that we are not paying more than what is being spent. If we are paying less than what is being spent, our share, that is okay. But if they're not making profit out of it, I am not up for that. They should not be making profit out of what we are paying for them.
I can share that we did have a meeting with them on the insurance premium, and staff was informed, this was a couple years ago, that the cost to them was lower than the cost that's being paid, and their position was that for years when the insurance cost might be higher, that this stadium authority would be kept at the limit that's articulated in the agreements. So their position was that over time it would ebb and flow, but it would equal out.
Okay. 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 So my next question, Ken, again for the scenarios for the SBL sales and service part of it, like we budgeted 3.6, and keeping in view, like looks like the activity, majority of the activity may not happen. I'm assuming these scenario B and C might be even further going down. So, and again, 3.6 million, I would like to see how that now $3.1 million has been arrived at for budgeting. That would be.
So I think the difference there between the 3.6 and the 1.8, I mean, the bulk of that difference is the buffet. So to the extent there are no NFL games, the $1 million, $2 million, $3 million that's assumed for the buffet, you know, we've assumed that we wouldn't be billed for that, obviously, without a buffet. So that's where the difference between item A and item B and C in terms of the scenarios. And so we've removed the buffet, and I believe there was some travel and training costs we just assumed wouldn't happen, like meals and entertainment. So we took a look at the line item budget that's provided in the proposed and adopted budget. To the extent those are the details we have, it's breaking out by specific line item, and we've, without any information from the stadium manager, we took a guess as to what savings could be arrived at. Definitely the buffet, but other more nominal costs around SBL sales.
Oh, okay. I would assume those costs should be going down too, because we might not have any SBL related activities on marketing, even on marketing, etc. So I would assume that cost should be going down too. And my next question or comments would be on the utilities. We took that all across the board the same. Like, you know, when we hold the events and other stuff, we spend much more, like all our catering event activities down. And I know SVP is seeing reduced activity in their revenues. So I think this number should also be going down on the utility side. I'm not sure how this utility component is basically, but I'm assuming that that part should be going down too.
So utilities, I believe it's very similar to insurance. It's a fixed amount that's budgeted based on the agreement. We might true it up at you know, based on actual. So if that's the case, then as there are utility savings, it would get passed on at the end of the year. But I believe it's a fixed amount, again, with the agreement that we have.
Okay. And the next is the Stadium Authority G&A. I know you mentioned that it involves the legal fees and other stuff. So is our, I'm not sure whether our staff time will be going higher or lower in the circumstances. I know we don't control the legal fees, but I'm more trying to divert towards when we are asking them to reduce their staffing, how is our staffing related, expenses related to that would be, because this is also substantially higher than the last year. I'm not sure what savings we can do on that line item.
Sure. So Stadium Authority General and Administrative costs. Scenario A was the as budgeted scenario, so it reflects the full budget as is. Scenario B assumes that you know, based on our current expenditure rate, what we're projected to spend for the year. Again, I do want to remind the board that this includes the litigation costs, and that's a good chunk of this. And then the 3.8 there in scenario C, that's assuming continued holding of vacancies that were for positions that were approved by the board, both in the finance department and the city manager's office, in order to generate additional savings to G&A. Now, to the extent there are no events. There still is a fixed level of activity that's required, both from a reporting a standpoint of managing the stadium and managing the finances. So some level of activity may decrease, but to the extent that with or without events, some of these activities are fixed and still needed to continue.
I just want to acknowledge that the stadium authority has always been understaffed, and frankly, that's how this condition allowed itself to persist, in that there was very little oversight. I think if we go back and we can provide the information about the increment of full-time equivalent staff was assigned from 2014, we're still barely at about 4 to 5 FTEs in total. And so and staff through the G&A budget provides a lot of support to the litigation with respect to discovery as well as financial analysis. And so to the extent that we are addressing litigation, staff is very busy, if not more, to support that effort as well.
Yeah, I would just like to add that I would just like to add from our point of view in the city attorney's office, a large part of our time and staff's time is devoted not just to litigation, but to just simply getting the answers for the board that you're asking these questions. It's like pulling teeth to get any kind of records or any kind of real financial information from the 49ers, and we spend a large part of our time just going over these things.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, and that's the reason I'm asking.
I will just add that it's not only litigation. Procurement has taken a lot of our time, and as recently as end of April, the stadium manager asked us once again to meet with our procurement staff to train them, and so they continue to ask for a lot of our time to help them with some of the most basic of items that they should be able to do by now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So thank you for the details, basically. Right. And that's the reason I was asking, like, if we do a comparative study from 2014, we will find out what the trend, why we are where we are. I know the litigation costs are going high, but that will give us a trend. What is our liability from the city resources being diverted to G&A for the stadium authority, basically. And my last bullet is legal contingencies. So this one, legal contingency, is not for the legal cost, if I want to understand that, Cam. This is not for a legal cost, but this is for the funds we incorporated, which we are not paying them right now, but we'll pay them down the line once they produce all the documents. Is that correct?
That's correct. This isn't per se directly to the cost of outside litigation. What this line item represents is as you may recall, as part of the 2021 adopted budget decisions, the board did not approve the total shared expense submitted by the stadium manager, and so because that we anticipated a similar practice of pulling the revolving loan and potentially having those costs, we set aside a legal contingency that would potentially cover any kind of cost associated with the shared expenses and/or revolving loan. But this was a line item that was approved as part of the budget, and then from trying to be conservative and trying to find some savings in a non-event scenario, we're just assuming that there would be some level of corresponding savings to legal contingency. And so what we did there in scenario B and C is we took it down.
Right. Yeah, I just, for clarification, I wanted, this is only for the shared expenses which we may be liable to pay as after the documentation comes to us. It has nothing to do with our legal expenses. That's what was my question. Right. Okay, and then the last.
Is that it, Authority Member Chahal, or do you have more questions?
One last question. So, keeping in view the whole scenario, as regards the debt payment for the stadium, how how confident we are that we will not default on the debt payments down the line when we are looking at all these ABC scenarios and other stuff. How confident that at least our debt payments will be covered, will not have any issues related to those.
Sure. So that's a great question. And so the debt payments are primarily reflected in those transfer outline items in that same page that you're looking at, the
Right.
25.5 million for the term A, the 5.67 for the subloan. That represents the minimum payment on our debt obligations. And so as you can see in these projections, with the revenue assumptions that we make for reduced NFL ticket surcharge, SBLs, and revenue from non-NFL events, if all these assumptions hold, plus the expenditure savings that are described that we've kind of covered, the bottom line there is that, in scenario A, there's about an $8 million deficit represented at that last row on that same page. Scenario B shows a $1.5 million deficit, and scenario C shows a $1 million deficit. So we would have to tap into our reserves to cover those operating deficits. But in all scenarios, the minimum amount for our debt payments are assumed to be made and could be covered, barring any change from the assumptions that we've compiled in these scenarios.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Authority Member Watanabe.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Ken, once again for your report, and also your staff. Hopefully I won't take so long, but let's see. Going back to the beginning of the presentation, on page 3 under the NFL events, I understand that this report is only to the end of 2019, and it will be interesting to see, because there was a playoff game as well as a championship game that was sold out, and then some, to see what kind of an impact it will have on the fourth quarter. When will we get the fourth quarter report, Ken? Do we have an idea of when it might be available?
Sure. So some of the information related to the fourth quarter, we're still waiting from Manco for. We're told that by the end of May, roughly, we should start to get some of that information. And then historically, what we've done related to the fourth quarter is we've brought that forward along with or shortly thereafter the CAFR, or the annual financial statements are produced, because we do have an auditor that goes through a lot of the transactions for the whole year. And so we typically bring the fourth quarter a little bit later, along with the closeout of the year, because the statements are audited by the financial audit. And that typically is in the August-September timeframe. We do, as you mentioned, we do know that with the 2 additional NFL events, there will be an added impact, primarily due to NFL ticket surcharge revenue. So that should help us. On the flip side, we anticipate the public safety costs associated with those events. So we're hoping to bring that back to you along with the financial statements in the August and September timeframe.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Let me see. Jumping ahead. Okay. Page 6. I know there have been some questions about the parking, related to the parking, and how much they are down. Offsite parking was down 34%. And I had the same question. I think it was as Board Member O'Neill. How do we know, how much maybe VTA was used, or Uber, or any of the other, carpool type, transportation? I'm sure you don't have that information, Ken, but it would be interesting to know where these cars are parking besides in the north side, because I know they still find ways of getting into those side streets over there, even though they're not supposed to. but it would be good to know where these cars are parking, if people are indeed parking or are they taking public transportation.
So that's something we can see what information we have, or maybe bring forward to the stadium manager to see what they have. We'll look at the decrease in parking and see what kind of trend information we have. But you're right, the VTA, the carpooling, the Uber information isn't something we directly have handily available.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Let's see, going on to page 8, well, I guess it's slide 15. The stadium builder licenses, again, I know there's been some discussion on this also, and so these numbers, with the relocations, netting 83 more seat licenses, and then there was a defaulted licenses in the amount of almost 1,500, I guess. And I understand that they are, either resold or available. But at the same time, there was a comment about marketing, and I don't see marketing going down, because those seats are going to have to be resold somehow, which is going to be done through marketing. And then there was something that I heard that regarding seat license holders, that I guess the catering or the management was looking at some way to incorporate food into the price of the ticket sales, so that people will, if they purchased it, and I don't know that you even had a choice, but if you purchase your tickets, that included in the price, for next season, there would be the opportunity to buy drinks, some kind of drinks. I don't think it was alcoholic, but soft drinks, water, and then some kind of snacks are built into the cost of the ticket price. And so I would imagine something like that would be marketed as well as a way to sell some of these SBLs that are available. So I think marketing is a constant cost in terms of making sure that as many seats SBLs are sold as possible. However, I have to say, I based on where we are right now in terms of the virus and the season going forward, even though the team had a good year last year, people are out of work, and we don't know if SBLs are going to be impacted, and I know it's probably going to be a while before we know that. Do you have any idea, Ken, or when we get those kinds of numbers or that kind of information to see how sales are impacted?
We receive SBL information quarterly, and so for fourth quarter SBL information as part of that report, we'll provide kind of the final year end. Now that's through March 31st, and so that would reflect about, 2 weeks of the shelter in place. Looking at first quarter of 2021, we're probably talking in the August timeframe before we have some of that information that would be provided to us. It's typically provided about 45 days after the close of the fiscal year. So, just walking back June 30th, so middle of July is when we'll get the information, and we'll bring some of that information back to the board later this year.
Great. Okay. Then let's see. Regarding the debt schedule, I'm glad that we've been, as the stadium authority, been able to continue to reduce the debt schedule and stay on track, if not ahead of it, and hoping that we will be able to, based on the minimum numbers that will be necessary, will be able to meet those goals and stay on track. Let me see. Then going on to 20, regarding the questions on the COVID-19 impact. And I thank the stadium, our executive director for just pointing out that, how the questions have been asked regarding operations at the stadium, so that we can see what the expenses are, and that if there are potential savings in terms of insurance costs, that it would just make everybody's life a lot easier in terms of just what kind of expenses we're going to have. I think it's only fair, in terms of where we are right now, just as I mean, this virus is impacting everybody, and it's a time when everybody should be working together instead of not sharing information. So it's disappointing to hear just the constant fight, it seems, just to get much needed information, just to be able to do the job, just to show everybody, where we are. And it's to the benefit of everybody, not just, the city or the stadium authority. Let me see, going over to, I guess, slide 21, and regarding some of the costs. So my understanding, or did I heard it right, that there is no performance rent, that we're not expecting any performance rent that would be able to offset some of the expenses.
That's correct. The projections that I showed you, I believe earlier on one of the slides, projected maybe $20,000 in performance rent to the general fund. Now that's before all the invoices and all the costs and any potential adjustments have been accounted for. So, I do want to note that when we brought the 2021 budget forward, the stadium manager had projected a loss of $1.7 to $2 million from non-NFL events. And so right now through Q3, it's about even at 20,000. We'll see where Q4 lands and bring that forward with that information.
Okay, great. And then can you mention a procurement, accounting procurement that's being worked on I guess to make these accountings easier. Is this something that you are working with or on behalf of the Stadium Authority and working with Manco? Will they be using the same system, or how exactly is that going to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is a joint effort between the Stadium Authority and the stadium manager. It's led by Lynn Lamb in our department, with purchasing kind of leading that effort. And so we did put an RFP out on the street for vendors to provide a separate accounting system for the Stadium Authority. We do have conversations with the stadium manager on using that system, including for shared expenses and the details that would be provided through shared expenses. So that's our hope, that the accounting system that was required by the agreement would be able to provide us with additional transparency that we don't currently have. And so it is a joint effort. They're in the, I believe, a negotiation stage with a finalist, and to the extent that that's successful and it moves forward, we would bring that to the board for approval. But that is part of an effort that has been taken a good chunk of the last year, led by Lynn Lamb, to try to bring forward a separate accounting system that was required by the stadium manager as part of their agreement.
Great. Okay. And that was actually, I was going to say it, and you took the words out of my mouth about transparency, that it gives us the ability to see more transparently, the costs and where, hopefully, where money is going, and just make these reports even easier to read, give you the ability to provide more information. So that would be great.
Yeah, that's our hope.
Good, good. And then you mentioned the 4 vendors. Are these 4 vendors that the NFL uses, or just arbitrarily vendors that provide these kinds of systems?
Oh, I'm sorry. So for the financial management system, we're negotiating with a finalist. I apologize if I misspoke about the 4 vendors, but they are. When we put out the RFP, it was for specific vendors that are knowledgeable and experienced at implementing a financial management system. Our preference would have been if they had experience in the area of both public sector and or sports, but we're working through that vendor list. I believe the evaluation team has made a selection, and so they're working through negotiations and scope of work related to that procurement.
Awesome. Okay, that's good news. Okay, and then I know there's been a lot of discussion and questions about the litigation and where the city finds itself, and there's just one thing that I just want to add, and just that the city hasn't instituted any of this litigation. It's just a comment on, just to finish up what I have to say. The litigation that the city's been put through has been an expense that we've had to take on as a result of being sued by the 49ers or arbitration. So and thank goodness the city has been, or the Stadium Authority has been successful in some of that litigation. But it just is frustrating that we find ourselves fighting for our money that rightfully belongs to us, and it takes X amount of time and money away that belongs to the city, but also just the impact to our staff's time, and because we have just so much going on right now. And again, this is a time when people should be working together, not opposed to each other. So I thank you for all of the report as always, and just I guess through these reports we are also reminded that the stadium is operated by people that don't know how to operate a stadium. I think our staff could run the stadium a heck of a lot better than, especially if they're having to train people that they already knew how to do that. So that's all I have, Ken. Thank you so much, and look forward to August or September when we get the next update. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Stadium Authority, did you want to say something, Brian?
No, I was just going to confirm that we have not initiated any litigation against the stadium. They've always initiated against the 49ers. They've initiated everything against us.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice little narrative that they keep putting out in the public, and that's passed on by a lot of people, is the litigation costs, and they're based upon the fact that they're suing us constantly. I remember running into an administrator in San Francisco after the city of Santa Clara, the vote to put the stadium, and they said, "Oh, good luck to you, get ready for a bunch of lawsuits." Well, guess what? They were right. First of all, thank you, authority members. Raj, did you want to say something again before I finish up on this? Council member, authority member Chahal?
I just have one comment to make, Mayor, pretty quick. I can make it right now. I know we had an agenda item on the consent calendar on Tuesday about Harvey Rose meetings to be presented to the board. So I know this thing relates to all the information gathering and all the budget information we are getting. So I have a request on that whenever we are reporting those minutes, dates of the meetings, if we can staff can prepare as like the minutes of those meetings, what was discussed and what was the response from the other side about those meetings, that would be great going forward. And I would even request, like, if the Manco and the stadium manager wants to prepare their own minutes so that we know where both the parties stand, what's going on in those meetings, so that we don't have any communication gap. That's my only comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you for that. So the first thing I wanted to say is I wanted to talk about what's happening right now and the plan for the shutting down the stadium during the pandemic. And what concerns me is that the Manco has sent us that they are conducting business as usual. And I'm just concerned that that doesn't comply with the county and state orders that they have given us, that that is a non-essential service, or they have new names for it now. High risk, low risk, they have different terms now. So the fact that they're trying to bill the public for food, travel, booking, marketing, you know, all of these things when the business is supposed to be shut down. And then in terms of their employees, the people working there, they're not Stadium Authority employees. They're employees of Manco and the 49ers. The fact that they're billing the public for their own workers when that is supposed to be a business that is supposed to not be operating concerns me. So either they're in complete denial of what's happening in the world and just not following the state and the county orders. I don't get it. So I want to make sure that, you know, it's a publicly owned facility, that we are complying with Dr. Cody's orders and Governor Newsom's orders to shut down the businesses. And I understand that we have to have a minimum amount of security, you know, we have to have security and we have to have a minimum amount of operations just to secure the facility and make sure it's protected. But the fact that they're conducting, and they've told us business as usual, I believe is a violation of all these orders. So what can we do? Because, and then again, charging the public for all of their employees without providing any backup information on this and saying that they're conducting business as usual. If you listen to the governor, which I do every day, and the county on all the calls, I know the city manager, our emergency operations coordinator, Lisa Schoenthal, all of us, city attorney, we're always listening to what's happening. That is going to be, by the time they open the stadium again, it's going to be the stage 4 at a time to bring people back. So it's going to be a little bit of time. Nobody can say how or when, but we do know right now that business should not be operating. So executive director or stadium authority attorney, you know, what can we do as the Stadium Authority Board to send them a message that, you know, hey, you're violating these orders, that has to be shut down. And you're not going to be billing the public for all of your employees and your traveling and your meals and your, you know, bookings and marketing of what, I don't know what they're marketing, but I'm just concerned that they're violating all kinds of things, and I don't want our Stadium Authority Board and the Stadium Authority and the city to be responsible for that.
Well, they've told us that there's hardly anybody at the stadium, so I don't know if they're violating an order in terms of work going on at the stadium. And they have said that the people that they're billing us for are working from home, but they refuse to say exactly what it is they're doing. And so I don't know if working from home, if they are in fact working from home, if that violates the order, but it certainly is inexplicable from the standpoint of what they could possibly be doing to benefit the stadium. And when we ask them specific questions about who are these people working from home and what are they doing, they simply will not tell us. They say general things like marketing. I don't know how somebody sitting in an apartment somewhere is going to be able to market an SBL to a prospective ticket holder when they can't even tell them that there's going to be a game in the stadium. So, I mean, the statements that they make back to us are just simply unbelievable. I asked them, how can you say that with a straight face? And they attempt to say it again with a straight face. So these conversations are theater of the absurd when you have with them. We've asked them exactly the questions that you've asked us to ask them, and we get nonsensical answers back from them.
I just want to make sure they know where we clearly stand, that they, that is a business that should not be operating right now. And I don't know what, they're their employees, not our employees. So I don't know what they're doing, but they're billing the public for all of whatever their unknown amounts of whatever.
It appears that they are billing the public to have their employees sit around and do nothing. That's what it appears to be.
Okay. All right. I would just like to make sure that we, at least subject to the board approval, send notice that, the public is not going to be paying for, we want the plan for the COVID shutdown plan. It's absolutely necessary that we have that, and our expenses should pretty much plummet when we have that.
And we have put them on notice, and and the board has put them on notice by, your budget does not include any of these activities. So they're violating the budget when they continue to try to bill us for this stuff.
So that's my next point, is that in the last several budget cycles, we have asked for all kinds of financial information, of which they never provide. And let me step back a little bit. Ken, our finance director for the Stadium Authority, and your staff, I want to really thank you for how quickly you have come up to speed in understanding the Stadium Authority and the Stadium Authority budget. Just reading the contracts and all the documents is just, it's incredibly challenging, but you have come to, represent the Stadium Authority as if you have been doing this for decades, and it's only been a really, really short time. So I want to thank you for, answering all these questions and really trying to make sense from a financial perspective when you're pretty much virtually working one-sided. When you're asking for information and trying to get information and trying to do the best for the Stadium Authority, and when we have property managers that do not supply the information that you need to get all of your work done, but you're doing the best you can, and you keep trying and working on our behalf. So I want to say thank you so much for what you're doing, and you're doing an excellent job. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor, for those kind words. And I just want to acknowledge the team around me does a great job to get up to speed. Rachel's been reading agreements left and right. And so appreciate the kind words and the support of the board. And I just want to acknowledge the team around me that helped put all this together.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. So the board took some action a while back that when it came to our attention that there were state procurement laws and prevailing wage laws and other laws that weren't being complied with by our property manager, Manco. And so we took the action that any expenses in the stadium or any contracts would have to come to the board for approval. And we've seen very few, if at all, any contracts that have come to the board for approval. But instead, Manco, instead of coming to the board for approval, they have just been accessing the revolving loan account like an ATM to get money, and then diverting funds that were supposed to go to pay off other loans into paying themselves back. So there is so much going on out there without Stadium Authority approval. And it's pretty incredible what's happening. My faith and hope is that when we do go to a court of law, and I know there's many opportunities, just like some of of all these lawsuits that have been brought by the 49ers, when we do go, that justice will prevail and that the Stadium Authority will be paid back for all of the lost compensation. The fact that and I also worry about the maintenance of the stadium and the capital improvement projects that should be done and how this facility is maintained, because when we were promoting the stadium for the voters in Santa Clara, there was a pretty clear plan that there was going to be enough reserve accounts to make sure that the stadium was always in tip-top shape and that there wouldn't be any unnecessary or unknown deferred maintenance items in the future, that it was always going to be kept at the, tip-top, premium level. I'm questioning that at this point, based upon how the finances are managed out there. I'm very concerned about how the maintenance is being managed at the stadium. So, in the public sector, if you had managers that had your property that were delivering massive deficits year after year, that refused to give you information on the financial stability of your asset, that didn't cooperate with you in any way, and did not maintain at the level that you wanted to have your property maintained, you would not continue with that manager. The fact that Manco and the 49ers represented that they had experience to manage large facilities and the expertise to manage large facilities in the first place was simply not true. And it's based on the fact that and this is pre-pandemic, I'm talking pre-pandemic, that we are losing so much money. They are booking money-losing events. And even the events that do make money, you trying to tell me there's an $11 million revenue and over $10 million in expenses, plus the $12 million in our budget of expenses, with no backup information, I find that really hard to believe. So I do believe that they misled us, that they had experience to manage this facility, not just for us, even for themselves. We received a bill for $4 million for buffet expenses that were probably included, I think that's what you were getting at, Authority Member Watanabe, probably were included as part of the SBL. But they decide now to come back, go back 6 years, 6 budgets, 6 years, and give us a bill from 6 years ago, starting 6 years ago. They don't even manage it well for themselves. If these were truly amounts that were due, they would have started billing 6 years ago. They don't even manage well for themselves. But with no backup information, here, Stadium Authority, here's a bill for $4 million in the middle of a pandemic. We want you to pay us. And we'll throw some other extra bills of $3 million with no backup information. There's all kinds of things they're throwing at us now. I think the Stadium Authority attorney made a good point, that we look at other, there's other people in this community, there's other businesses. We have Intel that's out there giving, $100,000 for our food program for children so they can eat on the weekends. And we have all these other companies, Great America, and all these other companies, Spectra. They're all contributing to our community to help us. There's sports teams out there, the Golden State Warriors, the A's, the Giants, the Sharks. They're all giving. What do we have? We have the 49ers and Manco sending us bills for expenses that, with no backup, from 6 years ago to the Stadium Authority in the city of Santa Clara. I really think that's terrible. It really, really is. And it shows the kind of community partners they are. So I'm hoping that, you know, we will get this resolved in court for the benefit of the Stadium Authority. There will be a time that the Stadium Authority, when it's under professional management, will make money, and all the promises that were made to the community will come true. But we have to get professional management. We can't let, you know, this organization take our Stadium Authority and this billion-dollar asset down the drain. We can't. So we're doing what we can to change that. It's going to take a little bit of time. But in the meantime, I want to thank our staff and our executive director and Ken and your crew and the city attorney's office and everyone in our outside counsel who are trying to help us on behalf of wrong. And especially it's wrong right now when we have small businesses that are folding. We have people that are hungry, losing their jobs, don't know where they're going to get their health care, and they're coming in to try to take money from us and do it in such an unethical way. I think is pretty terrible. I know they did well on the field last year. No public comment, so Assistant City Attorney, City Clerk. Oh, Councilmember Davis, Authority Member, did you want to say something on your motion?
Yes, Mayor. I make the motion to note and file, but I think it's prudent during that we had a very long discussion about this, that maybe the staff should bring back an official letter raising all of these questions that every one of us has, as Stadium Authority board members, has raised, and have them understand that these are the questions that we keep raising. We want to know why they have objections to what's going on, and make it a little bit more formal and create a paper trail for maybe if they're going to litigate us again with this, but maybe as a directive of noting and filing to basically get an action plan to, you know, at least, like I said, have a paper trail. Let's stop this crap with them. And then if we have to go to court, at least we have, you know, meeting notes here, but a letter directing from our Stadium Authority manager, executive director, attorney, citing these problems that we are having. I feel like we're spinning our heels, so let's document it. I don't know, city manager, if that's possible, or how I would make that and put that into a motion.
We have a couple of letters that we have sent. One was already shared on the buffet. There's another that is being prepared. If not, it has already gone, about the revolving loan fund. I do know that they tune in to the meeting, so most likely they have heard the discussion. But we can summarize the questions that we have summarized before and get them to them. I don't know that I can get them to understand, but we can certainly transmit.
I'd like the letter, Authority Member Davis, to come directly from the board, Stadium Authority Board.
Okay, that's I just need to know the direction from the executive director. If it comes directly from us, then hopefully they'll get it. They'll understand that, you know, we've heard, we've listened to staff, we got the report, but these are our concerns and objections to what's going on. So I'm looking for the documentation. So I was just looking for the verbiage, Mayor, to note and file this, but to have the letter sent to them directly from us as a result of this conversation that we've had on this agenda item.
Okay, so is that part of your motion? You're amending it?
Yes.
And who had the second? Vice Mayor Hardy?
Yes, I would be fine with that.
Okay.
And this motion is for both 9A and 9B?
This is for 9A and 9B, correct? Since our director, finance director, put both of them together. Maker of the motion for 9A and 9B?
Correct.
And vice chair for second? Okay. So that would be a motion to note and file and prepare a side letter from the Stadium Authority Board, signed by, I can sign it as the chair of the board, outlining our concerns that were outlined in this evening's meeting. There's some major themes there, but we want to emphasize including getting that shut down, the COVID plan until the facility can be reopened. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any members of the public here or online? Anyone? No?
No.
Okay. So thank you. No one in the cafeteria. Assistant City Clerk, roll call vote.
Vice Chair Hardy.
Yes.
Board Member O'Neill.
Yes.
Board Member Davis.
Yes.
Board Member Watanabe.
Yes.
Board Member Shahal.
Yes.
And Chair Gilmore.
Yes. Okay, and that passes unanimously. Thank you, Board. Thank you, Ken. That was a long item, and we appreciate all you and your staff and everyone's hard work, all staff's hard work on this. All right, next item we have is the, board consideration and possible action on the stadium manager's proposal to add stadium builders licenses to field seating in the north and south end zones of Levi Stadium. Executive Director?
Yes. First of all, I want to thank the board for continuing the meeting to today. It allows us more time with fresher minds to go over these important issues. This is a matter that has come up over the last couple of years, and that's the installation of field seats. And I just want to acknowledge that this matter is a little untimely in that we are not in phase 4 of the COVID governor's plan, which allows for the stadium to be activated. But this has been a proposal that has been under discussion as well as inquired about. And so I just want to transmit it to the stadium board so that you can consider it and once and for all understand the financials around it. So my presentation today covers the background of these field seats, some relevant provisions that are related to your decision as articulated in the agreements, the NFL's role, their proposal, and then our concerns and recommendations. So next slide, please. So in 2018, the stadium manager installed field seats without the stadium authority approval, and as well as without attaching SBLs to create a revenue opportunity for debt payment for the stadium authority. We did ask questions, and at that time, we were told that it wasn't advantageous because the NFL approves these seats on an annual basis. In the summer of 2019, the Stadium Authority submitted permit applications for temporary field seats. The issue again resurfaced around the SBLs as well as the ticket sales, and the seats were installed without SBLs or permits. Next slide, please. The stadium manager's proposal is to add SBLs to field seating in the north and south end zones of the Levi Stadium, which provides for additional debt repayment for stadium authority. So I just want to acknowledge that, as we'll see later, the agreement provision is that revenue for SBLs must go to repayment of debt. Proposals have previously been presented to the Stadium Authority, and the same concerns continue to remain unaddressed. Staff has requested an alternate proposal as allowed for in the agreements, and yet we have not received one. So let's go into the agreements very quickly. I'll just summarize what the six agreements and the related provisions are. First, there's the lease agreement, which provides the Stadium Authority has the sole and exclusive right to sell, license, and transfer SBLs or similar instruments for the seats located in the Levi Stadium, meaning that you can issue SBLs to seats, or you could be creative and look for similar instruments that allow for revenue generating ideas to provide debt repayment. The credit agreement requires that SBL proceeds pay down debt. So this is not a revenue opportunity. I understand in some cases it has been characterized as revenue for discretionary purposes. This is for debt purposes. And then there's the operations agreement where Stadco can sell tickets for seats that don't have SBLs by May 31st of each year for the immediately following season. So I think this is key in that the timing that the stadium manager presented this proposal was mid-April, and this was the next meeting that it could come to, and understanding that there's very little time to enter into creative discussions under the similar instruments possibility for the stadium authority to generate revenue for debt repayment. I also want to acknowledge that their proposal was not sufficiently put together, but yet we will be able to walk through some of the main concepts. And that, I think, is advantageous in their interest to take advantage of the May 31st date that's coming. There's the management agreement, which puts the stadium manager responsible for marketing and sales. And then there's the non-relocation agreement, which has for NFL tickets a surcharge of 10% of the ticket price and allows for Stadco to receive revenues from premium seating premiums. That's the term that's referred to, or the term that's used in the agreement. And then there's the SBL agreement itself, which is between the stadium authority and the SBL holder, that requires that if the seats are not available, that the stadium authority must provide a comparable seat and make the SBL holder whole in the case that there is no comparable seat. So let's go to the NFL's role in the next slide. So on top of the 6 different agreements and provisions that we need to consider when looking at this proposal, we also need to consider that the NFL is required to approve these field seats on an annual basis. In February 2019, the NFL provided a letter that temporary seating structures were subject to their annual approval, and therefore each year the stadium manager is required to submit their request for the seats. It's uncertain whether these seats will be permitted because of COVID-19 and the required social distancing. We did receive the proposal for 64 seats, which is reflective of the past years. However, with the requirements of 6 feet distance, I don't think that the 64 seats will comply with the social distancing, but we didn't get any additional information from the stadium manager that would be a COVID compliant proposal. I want to acknowledge that based on the county executive statements, it does not appear that attendees at sporting events at either a stadium or arena facility will be permitted until a later time. So what we're suggesting is that perhaps we've been presented with a proposal for which for the 2020 NFL season that may not even be realistic because there'll be no attendees. Next slide is, I did make several requests to receive complete documentation of the NFL's approval. I'm sorry, the city attorney made several requests to receive approval of the 2020 NFL season. And as a result, the stadium manager provided a redacted email from the NFL director on game operations stating that they only have conditional approval. And the letter was dated May 1st, which means that when we were presented with a proposal in mid-April, the stadium manager had not yet had all of the required approvals in place to present the stadium authority with a viable proposal. And in fact, they only sought the approval when we asked them for that confirmation. Next slide. So just to recap the activities, on April 16th, we received a proposal to add the 64 SBLs to the north and south end zones for Levi Stadium. The revenue projections span over 30 years. It's unclear whether the complimentary buffet costs are baked into the ticket price or the SBL price, but we did meet with the stadium manager on April 23rd, and they represented that the seats are eligible for the buffet. And that's a key component because it either makes the proposal a money loser proposal for the stadium authority, or it allows for it to generate some revenue. Next slide. So for distributions of tickets, the non-relocation agreement allows for the 10% surcharge for the ticket price, as well as it allows for them, as I mentioned earlier, to make additional revenue. What they suggested to us when we were talking through their proposal is their premium seating premiums. They sell the tickets anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200 per seat. And the ticket price for which our surcharge is based is on $175 per ticket. So I'll walk you through the proposal. It's on page 5 of the staff report, but we have a matrix on the next slide that I can go through some more of the numbers. So they gave us two options. One is for a $6,000 SBL pricing, and option 2 is for a $20,000 SBL pricing. And the assumptions are articulated in the report, but long story short, option 1 assumes the sale of the SBLs within 18 months, and option 2 assumes the sale of 44 SBLs within 12 years. There is an interest rate through the SBL agreement of 8.5% for the purchase of the SBLs, which results in interest earnings over 30 years of either $164,000, which would be revenue to the Stadium Authority, and about $400,000 under option 2. The ticket revenue over 30 years for the 10% surcharge, which is off the $175, is $539,559 for either one of the scenarios. The SBL revenue, based on the proposals and the assumptions for option 1 and 2, is either $384,000 or $880,000. The obligations, as we discussed with the stadium manager in late April, that were eligible for the complimentary buffet, the obligations result in a cost over 30 years of $4.1 million in either scenario. And that's assuming $135 per person for buffet costs, which is in the recent invoice that we received is demonstrated, and a 3% increase, which when staff did their reviews, it tends to be how they made the assumption in terms of increases. So in total, if the Stadium Authority were to consider option 1 over 30 years, it would make $1 million, and over 30 years for option 2, it would be $1.8 million. On an annual basis, that's about $36,000 per year for option 1 and $60,000 for year 2. Assuming the buffet is included as represented by the stadium manager, it's a money loser proposal for option 1 at $3 million per year per 30 years, or under option 2, it's $2.2 million of cost to the Stadium Authority. I do want to contrast this with what this, based on the numbers that were provided by the stadium manager. In contrast, over 30 years, they would stand to make $16 million to $21 million. Next slide. So here's just an example of the distribution of how the funds that flow for a $1,250 ticket. Obviously, you can see the 49ers receive the lion's share of the proposal, which is one of our concerns, is why we asked, could you come up with a similar instrument proposal that allows for the Stadium Authority to generate more revenue, which is their task under the management agreement. And they declined, and as of today, we have not received any alternate proposal that would be more viable for the Stadium Authority to consider. Next slide, please. So our concerns with the current proposal as presented is that the stadium manager is proposing the sale of a temporary product that's amortized over 30 years. And that's a problem because you're being asked to guarantee the product when you don't have the authority to renew it every year. In fact, by their own letter, the NFL has established that they are the ones that hold the authority for the renewal of these field seats. And so that's a risk to the Stadium Authority. And that risk is outlined in the stadium and the SBL agreement, where if the seats are not available based on any modifications or changes, that the stadium authority is responsible for making the SBL holder whole. Now, last year's discussions when we were talking about this proposal, we did raise the SBL provision up with the stadium manager, and while they acknowledged that they would waive or not implement that portion, if the seats were not approved, they would not put that in writing, and so that remains one of our concerns. And obviously the last is if the complimentary buffet is included, then the stadium authority has been presented with a money loser proposal. And that's a concern to us that we felt could be remedied through the simple instrument proposal that we have asked them to provide. So the stadium authority staff, we've shared our concerns over several years. We have asked for an alternate special instrument proposal from them since this has been an ongoing conversation over the last couple of years. And we also requested the stadium manager provide NFL approval. And we asked them to share with us their total revenue that they have generated from these seats in recent years so that we have an understanding, given that they've installed the seats without the stadium authority's approval, as well as without permits and have taken an opportunity that would allow for us to make revenue. Next slide. So again, as I've mentioned, the lease agreement does allow for special instruments. There are certainly creative ways that we could put together, or they could put together a proposal for the board to consider for them to market this. There is an opportunity for the stadium authority to make money and remove the risk, and that's unfortunately to do nothing. If you do nothing, you still collect the ticket surcharge. If we can go to the next slide. If you do nothing, then you still can collect the ticket surcharge over 30 years, assuming that they're installed each year, and make up to $539,000 and remove the risks of the annual approvals, the obligation to provide the buffet, and to provide an equivalent seat at the stadium authority's cost if the seats are not installed based on the NFL's approval. So the May 31st deadline, as I had mentioned earlier, I think is also something that really reflects perhaps a lack of good faith on the part of the stadium manager, and the fact that they know that these have been a matter of the stadium authority's interest for the last 2 seasons, and that we are open to a proposal to have received it with this meeting for the board to consider, as well as with one meeting left before the May 31st deadline hits, which then authorizes them to sell the tickets without SBLs. We have some concerns about the timing and the sequencing of how their timing was with respect to putting this proposal before the board. Next slide, please. So due to the potential complimentary buffet cost, it appears that the best action that we could recommend at this time is to take no action and be able to receive the ticket surcharge as some revenue, remove the risk, and then just move forward with hearing more from the governor and the county with respect to what's happening next with the COVID-19 pandemic and whether there will be attendees at the Levi Stadium for the 2020 NFL season. And we will continue to request similar instruments that are more advantageous and protect the interest of the stadium authority, which the stadium manager is charged with doing. So that was on my recommendation slide, and we can go to that slide now. So that's the recommendation, and we are prepared to respond to questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Executive Director. The first in line I have is Authority Member Chahal.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Deanna, for the detailed report, and I look at the detailed table you made on page 5, and I fully agree. It does not make sense if we have to be paying the buffet cost for each ticket. We are in a loss. And I fully agree with you that if these seats are not permanent and they depend on the annual approval of NFL, Stadium Authority cannot guarantee those. And as an alternate, what I was thinking of, like, we can look at this thing, but not with 10% of the 175. Either we should be looking at 10% surcharge on the actual seat prices so that we get that amount, because this will be a separate instrument which we are trying to do other than our regular seats in the stadium. So either we can look at just the 10% surcharge of the actual ticket price they're selling it, but if we are of the opinion that we cannot find out what the actual price of the tickets would be, then I would say we should be doing, like, say, 20% surcharge on our reserve ticket price. The reason I'm saying that, our projections are showing 539,000, and if we look at the projections of SBL revenue, so if we do 20%, we are somewhere in between the average of the two options they gave. We can recoup our SBL sort of income too. But I'm not going for SBL. What I'm saying is we should be doing 20% surcharge on the reserve price of 175 per ticket. That's it. If any season they are not permitted, we don't lose anything. We don't have any liability. If they are coming up with that, then we get that. Instead of 539, we will get the double amount. So those are my comments, and that table you made is excellent. It clearly shows that, and on top of that, we will be out of the buffet cost on that. We will not be taking care of any buffet cost with the 20% I'm proposing. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Authority Member Davis?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I'm echoing, I guess I can hear myself echoing in that room. I just wanted to make a comment that with the COVID going on, and I understand Executive Director Santana, you had to bring this to us, but this absolutely no sense whatsoever, being that we have this COVID crisis going on, number one. Number two is, like, we have no idea when that stadium is going to be open. That is in phase 4, I believe, and Newsom made it very clear that it was going to be at the end, because how are you going to put all of these people together and not have health risks? The second thing is, why would we even buffets? I know I don't even understand why we even do buffets, but I guess it's a moneymaker for them, obviously, that you stated in the report. I don't even think that's going to continue happening with the way COVID is also, because buffet restaurants right now are going out of business because they see the handwriting on the wall that it's probably going to be a non-existent restaurant happiness. What a buffet is a cool thing, but I don't think they're going to be able to survive. And I think a lot of them are already, like Sweet Tomatoes has already declined and said we're going to go out of business because that is their business. So once again, I understand why you had to bring this to us, but I would really like to make a motion, Mayor, to take absolutely no action whatsoever until we know what is going to happen coming down the pike. To me, this makes no sense. And the fact that they want their money for their buffet just is laughable. And putting seats on the stadium ground, I understand the SBLs are to pay off the stadium debt, but until we have clear direction from the governor and or Dr. Cody, I think that we should just take the recommendation of staff, no action, and direct the a stadium manager to just continue to give us information as it comes down. So I'm making staff recommendation on this.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. At the end of your comments, Authority Member Davis?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor. I had just some very specific questions. I'm very concerned about the phrase "make whole" in this proposal. I'm wondering, do our other SBLs have this same phrase of "make whole"? And if we are required to provide a buffet, as has been pointed out, we cannot do that possibly legally. What kind of a bind does it put us in?
So you both Councilmember Davis and Vice Mayor Hardy are correct that buffets are not permitted under the COVID order. But there is an element of providing free food for premium ticket holders, and so these are seats that are eligible for that particular benefit. I do want to go to the SBL agreement. It's under provision number 5, and their language is comparable seat, and at the sole discretion without regard to the original lease fee amount. And so our responsibility is, if seats are not available due to any improvement, alterations, or modifications, that we would need to provide a comparable seat where, and this would be a premium seat because field seats are obviously premium seats in any other circumstance. And so we would need to find a seat where we would make the person whole for, or comparable for, purposes of participating in the season's event.
Thank you.
And that is in all the SBL seats, right. But the difference there is, though we, through the stadium authority, under the provision that allows you sole authority, you have those are permanent seats that are installed, for which you have the authority to attach SBLs to.
Thank you. I understand the temporary and the concern with the approval by the NFL, that being an annual. So going with the idea that Member Chahal mentioned about the 20%, which made sense because it took away some of the concerns we had. Here's my question. If the 49ers are making a certain amount on these seats, and they're the manager, and they're supposed to operate also so that the stadium authority makes money, I don't see where the motivation is for them to give up 10% of their proceeds to us. I mean, where is that something we have to push if we want to go forward with that? Is that a possibility? Because you did say we could do a special order, a special instrument. Instrument, that's the word. Yeah.
Similar instrument.
Right.
Indeed, that has always been available to the stadium manager, to develop a special instrument that allows for the stadium authority to generate more revenue. However, this is why we put all the provisions in front of you through the many agreements. I believe it's not a coincidence that this proposal was submitted incomplete in mid-April with a request to bring this forward on May 12th, because through the agreement, and I'm flipping to that page, through the operations agreement under provision number 13, if there are no SBLs attached to seats as of May 31st on any calendar year, the tenant shall have the unencumbered right to sell tickets for such seats for the immediately following NFL season. So I did ask for a similar instrument proposal. We have not received one, but we also know that time is burning, and getting to May 31st is more advantageous for them.
So there is nothing that we could do to put together that proposal of a 20% for those temporary seats. It would have to come from the management?
I could propose, if that's the direction, and see if they're willing to accept that.
I wonder if the maker of the motion would consider that I like to take no action and let on the proposal before us, but if we could have a proposal that was advantageous to us as the stadium authority, then I don't know how we'd make the May 31st deadline. I have the same concern. I wonder if the maker of motion would like to amend that, or maybe I can make a motion afterwards.
Could I just make a comment?
Yes,
On this,
Yes.
on this May 31st deadline, what's I think important to keep in mind is if we were to do that, we're only talking about if we do or don't make this deadline. The only thing we would lose in terms of an SBL revenue, that additional 10%, would be 1 year's worth, and we're talking about a year that might not even happen. So I just wanted to make it clear to the board members that, you know, the effort in trying to get that additional 10% before May 31st, given the amount of money we might make for a season that probably won't even happen, is, you know, just to keep that into perspective is all I'm trying to and given the previous conversation, I highly doubt they would agree to it. But in any event, I just wanted to give the board members that perspective.
I appreciate that, and maybe this would be something that could be for next year. I appreciate that. Thank you, Council.
All right, Authority Member O'Neill.
Thank you. So, and this may be pointless questions, but I mean, I was rather struck by the ticket price that they set, you know, kind of as, you know, when they looked at what the Stadium Authority's portion, the 157 and this other portion, so they're basically creating a $1,250 ticket. And if you think about the other locations in the stadium where there's you know, because some of the seats are very, very pricey, as this one indicates. I mean, was there any justification for setting the SBL so low? When you look at what some of the other SBLs cost, you know, for locations that wouldn't be considered nearly as advantageous, and you know, and their justification for creating for themselves a $1,250 ticket when, you know, like I said, when then our base amount is so small. Did they offer any justification for that other than it's very advantageous for them?
That's about the extent of what I heard. We as the similar instrument provision part of the provision allows, they have the opportunity to develop a proposal that's equally as advantageous for us, and I put that in front of them several times. Mm-hmm. But obviously, this is the 175 rate is equivalent to other seats of this premium nature, and that was their position.
And then on the,
if I had an SBL, you know, some other place in the stadium that I paid, you know, $50 or $60 or $80,000 for, I wouldn't be very happy seeing this. But okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to ask.
Stadium Authority Attorney.
No, I just wanted to point out that, you know, if you set the price of the SBL too high and no one decides to buy it because of the uncertainty of whether these seats are going to exist in the future, then what happens is nobody buys the SBL and they still get to sell the tickets to the seats. So we have to remember that, you know, when this is our SBL, and and that's the main reason it's important for the board to understand how these things are priced. We're in competition with other seats in the stadium. There are some vacant SBLs in that stadium that we're also trying to sell right now. And if we make this one too high, someone might buy the other one. And we just don't have enough information about the various different elements of the pricing to be able to make the call of what would be a good SBL price for this seat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Authority Member Watanabe.
Thank you, Mayor, Chair. And once again, thank you for the presentation. I have a lot of concerns. Obviously, I mean, I'm supporting the motion with staff recommendation, but, you know, I've seen these seats. I mean, it's no secret. My husband and I have SBL and I have seen these seats even going back 2 years ago, and was surprised when I saw them. And now it seems like maybe somebody got their hand caught in the cookie jar, and now they have to disclose that they've had these seats and they've been making money off of them once again, you know, at the expense of the city. We're not getting, or the stadium authority is not getting anything out of it. And then based on this distribution of tickets and what would be charged and what the stadium authority would make off of it, frankly, is a joke. And to be honest with you, I think these seats are a joke. I mean, who wants to sit in the end zone and watch a football game? Really, I would rather put my money, if I'm going to put my money into an SBL, put it into a seat that's on the sidelines where I have a better view of the field. This is just another money-making opportunity that we are going to make very little off of, and with the season potentially not even going to happen, I really don't think that this is an opportunity or a good time to be having this discussion. So all the more reason why I support the motion, and maybe we can talk about it at another time. But right now, this is not the time to discuss this. Thank you.
All right, sorry, I stepped away. Authority Member Chahal?
Thank you, Mayor. Vice Mayor Hardy, the only reason I was trying to do 20% was because as per the NFL guidelines, these seats cannot be permanent. And if they cannot be permanent, then going route of the SBL licensing is a risk for stadium authority. So that's the reason I'm taking that out. And instead of that, I'm trying to increase the revenue. If we can increase the revenue from these seats to the stadium authority, that's the reason I said 20%. And if the other reason I said 20% more than what we are getting 10%, because as mentioned in the report, these seats are getting anywhere from $1,000 to something above. So I think they should be willing to give us 20% on these particular seats. So I'm trying to make a proposal which is no liabilities for the stadium authority. If they put the seats for a particular season, we get the revenue. If they don't put the seat, or if they're not there, who cares? Like we are not worried about the SBL liabilities and other stuff. So that's the reason I was, and that's the only reason I'm saying I would be opting for direct the stadium manager after such information about 2020 season, and receive and do the negotiation on these seats, so that now that we have time, they're not we know the season will not be happening pretty soon. So we can finalize this contract out of as a special instrument and generate revenue for all of these seats whenever they put it. That's the reason I was asking for more revenue, more than 10% on those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple questions and a statement. First of all, the loss of 2 to 3 million on the side of the stadium authority versus the gain for the 49ers of 16 to 21 million, it's pretty much a no-brainer for us. We wouldn't make that business decision at all. However, City Executive Director, they put these seats in for the last couple of seasons without working with us or conferring with us or getting any approvals from the Stadium Authority Board. So were we collecting the surcharge from these seats for the last 2 years? Do you know?
I would have to defer to the finance director to respond to that question as to whether we've done that type of review.
And if you haven't, that's okay, because that may be, some owed money.
We can come back with.
There probably is some revenue that's owed to the Stadium Authority from the seats that they put in. And then my second question is, so I don't want to put Ken on the spot right now, but it'd be nice to have that information. Secondly, the proposal on the table was that they would have these larger SBL fees the seat builder license fees. But then the tickets would be approximately $1,200, but yet we would only collect revenue on a ticket price of $175. So why, is that just their proposal, or is there something in all of our agreements that say the ticket price, you're collecting the surcharge on an actual number that's not really the ticket price? Oh, Stadium Authority Attorney?
Yeah, the agreement says, the lease says that we collect 10% of a ticket price that they set, and they get to charge these premiums on top of that ticket price. So in effect, they determine which portion of the amount of money that a ticket holder would pay for admission. They determine which portion is allocable to the ticket price upon which the 10% is set, and which portion goes to them.
Oh, so they can set whatever ticket price they want for our sake, for the SBLs, and then can set it higher? Because the $175 ticket price wouldn't even be in their, the upper sections of the 400, especially when they're winning. So what, I don't understand, that's just such a...
That's just the way it reads
Okay.
in the lease. I mean, that's...
Is this the same for all of our other SBLs? Meaning they're telling us they've determined, each seat would have a certain ticket price, but yet they're charging more? They're adding these premiums on?
Yes, that's how it works for the, basically the way it works is the Stadium Authority at some point approved the SBL pricing for the original sale. Excuse me. And, but then the way the lease works is all the SBL gives you is the right to buy tickets for that particular seat. But because of the way they do their ticket pricing by season, they set the price of the seats as well as the.
Okay.
I could really use a glass of water.
It'd be nice, I can't share mine with you, but other than that,
sorry.
I'll get you some.
So
Nora's going to get you some. Okay.
But no, essentially that's the way it works, is that the lease says they get to charge the ticket price upon which the 10% is collected, and then on top of that, they get to charge these premiums upon which we don't have a control. So
that gets them to the 16 to 21 million of revenue that
That's
they
how
would
they get
make
that
from
extra
these
revenue, yeah.
seats, where the Stadium Authority would lose 2 to 3 million for these seats. So that, okay.
If that's what they do charge us, yeah,
Well, that makes no sense for us.
Right.
And with all due respect to my colleagues, if I were to negotiate to go back with this, I would not say 20%. I would negotiate something much better that makes sense for the Stadium Authority. This proposal is, it shouldn't go anywhere. It's not a benefit to us, because the NFL at any time can say, no, I don't approve these seats. As soon as the NFL says, because it's just year by year. So, and our SBL's for 30 years, or what do we have left? Is it 30 years? Is that a 30-year
Yes,
SBL?
they're amortized.
Amortized over 30 years?
They're amortized over 30 years.
So
yeah.
at year 2 or 3, they could say, no, we don't approve these seats, and then we have to relocate them somewhere at our cost. So this is like a year-to-year lease. That's all it is, and it makes no sense for us to do that. But we should be collecting a surcharge on what they're actually charging for the ticket prices. That's what we should be collecting on. So if the staff ever does go back and negotiate, it wouldn't be for 20%, it would be for 10% of what they're actually charging for tickets. But the Stadium Authority would have to be let off the hook to relocate these seats, because it's at the pleasure of the NFL whether or not these seats exist. So we wouldn't take on that responsibility. So I think we've already wasted a bunch of time on this terrible proposal. So we have a motion to Debbie, what your motion was it the staff recommendation to do nothing?
Correct.
And do nothing, we make, over 30 years, a measly 539,000 because they're using that $175 ticket price, which is a mere fraction of what they're actually charging. So there's a motion second. Any other discussion on this? Assistant City Clerk?
Okay. Vice Chair Hardy?
Yes.
Board Member O'Neill?
Yes.
Board Member Davis?
Yes.
Board Member Watanabe?
Yes.
Board Member Shahal?
Yes.
And Chair Gilmore?
Yes. And that passes unanimously, and thank you, staff, for trying to make sense of all that and bringing us the options. All right, next on the agenda, we have reports of members and special committees. Does anybody have any reports?
No.
Okay, City Manager, Executive Director report?
I want to thank the board for allowing me to finally present the proposal. I know it wasn't advantageous to the Stadium Authority, but I had personally been criticized for declining it, and now I have the opportunity to share with you the purpose of why it was declined. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Deanna. All right. That leads us to our adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Authority Member Davis, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Motion second. Okay, Assistant City Clerk? Stadium Authority Clerk? Whatever you're called.
Okay. Vice Chair Hardy?
Yeah.
Board Member O'Neill?
Yes.
Board Member Davis?
Yes.
Board Member Watanabe?
Yes.
Board Member Shahal?
Yes.
Chair Gilmore?
Yes. And that passes unanimously. And thank you, everyone, staff and city council members, for agreeing to this adjourned meeting. I don't think we could have done this the other night. So we had a very substantive discussion. So with that, meeting's adjourned.
Goodbye.